It's recording. There we go. So if anybody needs to watch this again, we are going to be recording this and it'll be posted for about 2 more weeks after we finish this. Thank you for coming today. This is great. My name is Wiegel, and I am the Dementia Outreach Specialist for Columbia and Sauk Counties for the Alzheimer's and Dementia Alliance. I'm really excited. This is our first experience doing education programs virtually. So if I have some technical difficulties, please feel free to let me know or bear with me as we go through this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sharing the with you so that you're able to see the actual PowerPoint. I can also email that to you if you feel that that would be something that you would like to save. So I'm going to go ahead and try sharing my screen with you. Bear with me.
Janet, do you want everyone to mute on their end?
Oh, yes. If everyone would be able to mute, that would be terrific. And then if you want to talk, you can share things into the chat box and I'll be able to see them. There we go. Can everybody see that? Yes. I'm just looking down. Got it? Okay. All right. Well, everyone I can see has said that they can see it. So we have one more person joining us here. Hold on just a second. Wonderful. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about communication tips and strategies today. And this is a really difficult topic, especially when you're dealing with a person with dementia. I really struggled myself. My experience was both with my mother and my father. My mother had vascular dementia. My father had Lewy body dementia. And so I didn't realize at the time how much their communication was going to change and the way that it was going to change. So that's why we really created programs to talk about how to help you through these different experiences. Our organization is in 15 different counties in south central western Wisconsin. And if you need us, this is the easiest way to be able to get a hold of us. We really try to be the boots on the ground for folks to help them through not only the big changes that you go through with dementia and caregiving, but the little things too. So you can say, gee, I need some help with trying to figure out how to even look at facility care, or you can ask questions as simple as, Mom's having a really hard time bathing. How do I handle that? So we're here to be able to help you for any of those. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how dementia actually affects communication. And dementia being progressive, everybody may have a loved one that's at a different level. So we're happy to have the ability to share with you on a variety of different levels. So some people might be in the early stages, some people might be in the middle stages, some people might be, towards the end. And so we're going to talk generally about how it's different for each one of those stages and different ways that you can encourage and relate a person with dementia, relate to them, and help them through learning different techniques yourself. So one of the things that is really difficult, a lot of people say, well, how do you handle hearing the same question 15 times in the same 5 minutes? And the reason that I'm showing you this picture is I want you to realize that there is a physical change happening to this person that you can't see on the outside. Sometimes we're a child and we're dealing with a parent. Sometimes we're a spouse and we're dealing with another spouse. Sometimes we're a grandchild or a relative that is dealing with another loved one. And sometimes we're just a friend. And it's really difficult because unlike a broken arm that you can see, dementia isn't something that you can see on the outside. So what I wanted to do was show you exactly what a brain looks like. So this is a cross section of a brain. And it shows, like in the middle, you can kind of see that little bridge. That's the amazing thing that connects our left and right brains. But you can see how this is a brain that's very full, it's round, it has good coloration, and it's very full within the space that it has. I want to show you this brain. And this is what happens with advanced Alzheimer's. There are a lot of different kinds of dementias out there. Alzheimer's is only one of them. And so I want you to understand that each one of those types of dementia causes brain cell death. And just like if you were looking at a fence outside with a grapevine on it, and you went outside and you picked a grape off of that vine, and you brought it in and you set it on your kitchen table, what would happen to that grape? It would start to shrink. It would start to dehydrate. It would start to get more wrinkles in it. And eventually it would turn into a raisin, and then eventually it would mold. And that's kind of what happens when you disconnect a brain cell from the whole brain. Is a brain cell will actually die. It will shrivel. And so that's why you can actually see the difference in the size of the brains. Now, the reason that I'm showing you this is because I want you to remember that you can't see this on the outside of that person. And you may not understand why they're saying the same thing over and over and over again. But the small area in the middle is a lot of times where the hippocampuses are located and where we see the most shrinkage when it comes to a person with an Alzheimer's type dementia. And so it really kind of brings into focus the fact that their brains are not working like their brains have always done. Therefore, we have to communicate differently with them than we have always communicated, because their brain isn't able to function the same way that we normally have. So there's 3 different steps to actual communication. Receiving the information, so you're inputting information. You do that through your senses, your eyes, your hearing, your sight, your touch, and your taste. And we, as humans, rely mostly on visual. It's amazing. I think it's almost like 60% of all of the input we have is visual input. So it's very difficult for a person to receive information if they're not able to focus correctly. It's very difficult for someone to input information if they can't hear correctly. Or if they're just not aware of your presence. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So receiving information is one way that can be affected by dementia. Processing and comprehension is when you take that information and you store it in either short-term or long-term memory. Short-term memory is what they call your working memory. It's usually between 1 second and about 48 hours. It depends on how much information your brain stores at one time. But what it does is your brain takes information from the short term and puts it in the long term when you sleep. That's what your brain does. It actually sorts out all of the things and says, I need to keep this, but I don't need to keep this information. And if it's something that's really important, it will store it in long-term storage. The difficult part is that dementia can affect both of those things. It can affect short-term and long-term information. So you're inputting information, that's receiving. You're storing that information, which is processing and comprehending. And then you're responding to that information. That's the 3rd step of communication. And responding is not just the verbal response. It can be a physical response. It can be a verbal response. It can be a facial expression. It can be body language. It can be a lot of different things that we expect for a response. And one of the most difficult things is realizing that dementia affects all three of these, depending on how that is working with every individual. Every person's different. Everybody's communication techniques are different. And they will always continue to receive information. But it's kind of like dementia is a metal helmet that kind of covers their ability to input information. Sometimes if information is coming in, it might hit that helmet and bounce off. So they're not going to remember it at all because it's not even getting in through that helmet of dementia. The other thing is it might get in, but it might be kind of messed up going in. And that can create a lot of issues for that person who isn't able to remember correctly what you said. You might say, your appointment's at 9 o'clock tomorrow. And they're like, oh, my appointment's at 9 o'clock on Friday. No, it's tomorrow. No, you said Friday. So that information isn't going in or being stored correctly. The process and comprehension part is that dementia kind of makes Swiss cheese out of your memories, especially in Alzheimer's dementia. And it's really difficult for them to be able to store information. If it's not going in correctly, they can't store it correctly. So instead of putting it in the correct file drawer in their brain, they may end up putting it on the floor. And although it's there, they can't easily retrieve it. And the other thing is that short-term memory is usually affected first when we're talking about dementia. So they're not always able to remember the why of what you said or the fact that you just told them that. So they may ask over and over and over and go back and reiterate it because they're still not remembering that information because the short-term memory isn't working. And the responses that you may get from them are can vary pretty extensively. Many times long-term memories are clearer than short-term memories when you're dealing with dementia. But sometimes even long-term memories get confused. And so there are holes in those stories. There's holes in those memories. And so when they go to pull them out and bring them out, the most difficult part of that is that their brain automatically fills in the hole with whatever happens to be handy so that the memory's complete. I worked with a wonderful family whose mother would be telling a story and all of a sudden it would go a completely different direction than it had ever gone before. And they're like, wait a minute, that's not how the story went. And what happened was that memory had been affected by dementia. And so she was just filling it in with whatever happened to be there. And so that can be really difficult for folks too when they're responding. And they're like, no, that's how it was. But their brain just isn't working correctly. So we talked just a little bit about effects of dementia on communication. We have that short-term memory loss. We have that problem with people's ability to understand and respond. One of the other things that many people who have a frontal lobe dementia or aphasia dementia, they may have difficulty finding the right words. I met a gentleman once that I worked with who had been an English teacher for like 32 years. And he had aphasia dementia, which is a frontal temporal. It affects the lobe right up here. And he lost his nouns. And that was really difficult for him. He was an English teacher. So he would say, you know, this thing, you know, you hold it in your hand, you move this thing. But he couldn't come up with the word mouse to explain what he was talking about. So his inability to come up with that word was incredibly frustrating for him. And because of that, he would stop talking. He just didn't want to talk anymore because he couldn't put the words the way he wanted them to be. And eventually he lost so many words that he couldn't. We went from sentences to 3-word responses to 1-word responses to just a physical response. So those can really change as the disease progresses. A lot of times they'll be talking about something and all of a sudden they'll be like, where was I going with that? I do that though, but with dementia, it happens a lot more frequently. They lose their train of thought, or they'll get really frustrated because they can't come up with what they were trying to say. They may have difficulty organizing words logically, which means that they may talk kind of out of order, like sweater you're putting on, or they may be like, on the couch sitting, please. So they may rearrange that. Their language may also change with substituting words. They may say, oh my goodness, did you see my new sweater? I'm really excited about this. This is my new sweater. It's got a purple cover and I love it. It's great. And so they're using the word sweater to describe a phone because they accidentally mixed up those two words. So that can be really difficult for folks. And due to all of these things, they may speak less often. I actually had a gentleman with a hearing loss, and he would say, what? And he just got to the point where he didn't want to talk anymore because he felt bad having to say what all of the time, or not being able to put together the words that he wanted to respond with. So the other things, oh, my screen froze. Hold on a second. There we go. Other things that might affect communication is the environment. Background distractions, glare, glasses and hearing aids, overstimulating environments. Our brains can process an enormous amount of input at one time. While we're sitting here, I can tell you the color of the paint on the walls. I can tell you what the texture is of the rug under my feet. I can tell you what color the walls are behind me. I can tell you how the lighting is affecting me. I can tell you if I'm cold or hot, or can I move or can I not move? Is there a window behind me? So all of this input is coming in at one time. And the problem with that is we don't always think about the environment. We think about the person, but we don't think about the environment. One time I was talking to a woman and she finally looked at me and said, do you know that I can't see your face? And I looked at her and I said, why can't you see my face? And she said, because there's a window behind you and you're black. You're a shadow. I can't see you. And so I never really thought too much about glare behind you, but it really makes a huge difference, especially if they have eye sensitivity and they're not interpreting things correctly. Background distractions, music, television. I walked into a house one time that had police scanners, 2 different ones going on at the same time. And the people who lived there were so used to it, they just completely ignored it. But I couldn't even concentrate enough to talk with them effectively because there was so much going on loudly in that area. If your loved one doesn't have their glasses on, they're not going to be able to correctly visually store information or correctly interpret information. If they don't have hearing aids in, they aren't going to be able to store what you said if they can't hear it. So, all of these things that we think about that shouldn't make a big impact but do, especially when you're dealing with someone whose brain isn't working well. A lot of times, overstimulating environments are just too much for them. Big groups, large rooms, too much input at one time. My husband is notorious for having the television on, the radio on, and trying to talk to me at the same time. And I don't know about any of you, but I can't do that. He can tune those things out, but I can't. And so when you get overstimulated, it's a real difficult situation for people with dementia. I had one lady who wasn't able to walk in the doors of Walmart. She would walk in and turn around and walk out, because when she walked in, she was hit with such bright lights and so many people. And, you know, they have those things as you walk down the aisle that are talking to you. And there's a greeter trying to talk to her. And there's all this media right as you walk in, the signs and the decorations and all these toys and items that you may want to buy. And it was so much for her that she just couldn't process information in that environment. So when you are trying to work with a person with dementia, consider these things. These really do make a big difference. In the early stages, the way that we suggest you approach communication is keeping things short and simple. When my mother had vascular dementia, she used to tell me that I sounded like a chipmunk. Because I would speak really quickly and give her a lot of information in a short period of time. And she said that sounded to her like a chipmunk. We don't realize how much information we give in a short sentence. Just walking into a store or going to check out, they'll say, "Hi, do you want paper or plastic? Do you want to donate something to the children's, network? Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you have your card?" It's so much information that we forget, that we can't barrage their brains. Their brains are moving slower than they have before. So keeping it short, keeping it simple. It's really important to give that person time to respond, because our brains are functioning normally and we have all of those connections. But a person whose brain is failing or is impaired needs time to process. So you might say, "Hi," and it might take 5 seconds before that person says, "Oh, hi," because it takes them time to process what you're saying. It's helpful to have those pauses in between when you say something. Be very careful with abstract concepts. The English language is riddled with sayings, and we tend to use them a lot. I was running a memory cafe one time, and the gentleman walked into the memory cafe, and I greeted him, and he looked really upset, and I said, "Something's wrong. What is it?" And he said, "I lost my hat." I said, "Oh no, you're really in a pickle, aren't you?" And he said, "Pickles? I love pickles." And we spent the next 45 minutes trying to explain to him why we didn't have pickles at the memory cafe that day. And it was just an expression I was using. So I kind of learned my lesson there, that you have to consider what and how that's going to be interpreted. They may have a lot of difficulty talking on the phone. And right now, during this time with our stay-at-home orders, we haven't been able to see our loved ones, especially as much as we're used to, and especially if they're in a facility, because they weren't letting people come in and out. And it's very difficult for people with dementia to relate to a telephone. If they can see a picture of you, they're much more likely to understand what you're saying than if they're talking to you just abstractly on the phone. So when you start to see difficulty with that, it's because they want to read your face and your body language to interpret what you're saying. They can't just pick it up from the tone of your voice anymore. The other thing that we tell people to do is to make sure you get their attention before you try to talk to them. Thinking about that environment. If you've got tons of stuff going on in that room and you're trying to tell them something, it's not going to work. So get the person's attention, get them right, get right in front of them and say, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that this is what's going to happen next." Get that person's attention before you do it. One of the things I want to share that we have learned over the years recently is that people's focus visually with dementia changes. So we found even folks who are in the early stages of dementia that seem to function completely normally. And if you test their vision, they will test normally, but they start to lose peripheral focus. So it's kind of like wearing blinders. If you come at them from the side, they're not going to pick that up. If you come at them from the back, they're not going to pick that up. Their focus is straight ahead. They have, these kind of blinders on. When you get into middle stage dementia, we're finding that their vision is affected even more. So instead of having just blinders and having your up and down vision not so much affected, we're starting to see them go to binoculars. So they're always looking down or looking up or looking sideways to make sure that they're okay and that there isn't anything coming at them. But also it's the communication part. You've got, like a 2-foot square block in front of them that you can get their attention in. But again, from the side or from the back, you're not going to be able to get a hold of them or get their attention. When we get to the later stages of dementia, and this happens to most folks, it goes down to a monocular. So you're at basically 12 inches square right in front of that person. So when you're talking about getting a person's attention, you need to think about how you have to arrange yourself to communicate with that person. From across the room, from a different room, from behind them, they're not going to record or store that information the same way if you don't have their attention. So that's something to think about even in the early stages. When you're going into the middle stages, a lot of times they start relying on individuals to help them a lot more. If you just say to a person with dementia, okay, go into your room and get dressed. In the beginning, they might be able to do that. It might become a little more difficult for them when they're in the early stages because it might get a little overwhelming. But especially when you hit middle stages, it's going to be really difficult because they're just going to open those closet doors and go like, this is way too much information. I can't pick out something from this. There's 50 blouses here. How do I do this? So you might have to help them by simplifying their choices. Saying, oh, well, you know what? It's sunny today. You could wear this or you could wear this. Which one would you like? And so limiting those choices so that they don't feel quite so overwhelmed. And remember to offer one thing at a time. So if you're just talking about shirts, just talk about shirts. Don't be like, this whole outfit and these socks and these shoes. That's too much information for them. Do one thing at a time. The other thing is to make sure you keep it positive. People who are starting to struggle with language and making choices and communication really are watching you. Because if they can't understand what you're saying, they're going to start to read your facial expressions and your body language. So if you approach them like this, they're not going to want to respond to you because you have this facial expression of, I don't want to deal with you, or I'm mad. So you really want to think about keeping it positive. Watch your facial expressions, smile, laugh. Try to keep your body language open rather than closed and cross-armed and now I have to do this with you kind of a thing. Stay positive and make sure that when you're approaching them, you yourself are ready for this conversation. Sometimes we have to throw things at people very quickly, but it's really important for you to stop and take a breath before you walk in there and try to do this, because then you're calm and your body language and expression will help them understand things better. So as we progress through the disease and we talk about how do you get a person to do things when their communication isn't working so well? One of the things is we really encourage people to invite them to do something with you. If you say, well, I think that you need to go to the dentist, so we're going to take you to the dentist. They're going to be like, yeah, no, I don't need to go. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to go to the dentist, I'm going to have my teeth checked, I want you to come with me and we'll go together, they're going to be a whole lot more likely to do it with you rather than being forced to do it alone with you watching. So inviting people to join you. I'm going to go for a walk. Why don't you come with me? Or if you know that their response is going to be no, you just say, come with me. I'm going for a walk. The other thing is, as humans, we're very programmed to help other people. So you can say, you know what? I'm really behind in the kitchen. Do you think you could help me and dry these dishes while I get dinner started? Asking for help with a very specific thing, they're usually very comfortable with doing that because they want to help. They really do. Another way to encourage action with them is to ask them to try. This sounds really strange, and we do it a lot with children, but they're not children. But just asking them to give it a go is important. They'll be like, nope, can't do it. Say, well, I'm going to go do this, and I would like you to try too. And so they're usually much more willing if you ask them to try than if you just demand that they do it. Breaking down tasks into simple steps. We don't realize how many steps there are to getting dressed or brushing your teeth or going outside. So let's just take going outside as an example. First off, you have to be able to determine what the weather is outside before you go out. Is it sunny? Is it cold? Is it pouring rain? And then you have to figure out what you're going to wear to go out so that you're appropriate for the weather. Then you have to know where the door is to get out. And then you may have to navigate steps or input a different environment. And then you have to know where you're going. And we don't think about all of those steps, but we need to, because when a person's brain is not inputting information correctly and they can't take one whole experience at the time. So you're going to have to break these things up into steps. So you can say, we're going to get ready to go outside. Let's put your coat on. One step. Let's do that first. Then let's go to the door. Go over to the door. Then let's open the door and go outside. And then let's close the door and lock it. And then let's go for a walk. So break those tasks down into simple steps. If they're really struggling with a particular thing that you're trying to do, distraction and engagement are fantastic. My father loved barbershop quartets. That was his favorite thing. And when he would get really frustrated, one of the things that we used to love to do was sing. So let's say if we were trying to get his pants on and he was getting so frustrated, I'd be like, hey, Dad. And he'd be like, what? And I'd be like, if you want to be a badger, just come along with me. And we'd start singing. And all of a sudden he was distracted. That wasn't at all what he was expecting. And that went a whole lot easier to encourage him to get his pants on. And then he wasn't focused on the pants and his frustration. He was focused on something else. So distracting them with something else or engaging them in a different way can make a big difference for those folks. Even just offering a glass of water. You know, if they're struggling with something, you can say, would you like a glass of water? I'm really thirsty. And then all of a sudden you've kind of broken that situation and you go, oh, okay, let's do a glass of water. And then now let's come back at this a different way. It gives you a break to be able to figure out how to reapproach it also. And then worst case scenario, back off. I know that that's really difficult to do sometimes, But if someone is extremely frustrated with you and they are very adamant that they are not doing this, they're not going anywhere, I'm not putting those clothes on, I'm not going down these stairs, back off. Try that distracting and engaging, and then you can reapproach later, or you can have another person reapproach if there's someone else there, or try again. In 10 minutes, they may not even remember that they had a problem with this before. So use those things to help you as you're communicating with a person. One of the golden rules of dealing with a person with dementia is you are never going to win an argument with them, so don't try. If you argue, if you criticize, if you correct them all of the time, it makes them feel bad. It makes you feel bad, and it doesn't enhance the situation at all. The biggest problem with this is that when we criticize, when we correct them and say they have to do this the right way, their brain may not be able to process the right way anymore. They have a different reality than we have. And so when we're talking about an argument in a person's world with dementia, their world, they're right. They could be 20 years old and 10 feet tall and bulletproof. What do you mean I can't drive? I'm fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with me. And so they are going to argue with you about not being willing to do whatever it is you want them to do or not do. So don't argue. You're going to have to figure out a way to go around them. They're kind of like a rock when they get like that. So you have to figure out a way to make it work in their reality so that they're not going to argue with you. It's not beneficial for you or them. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. The other kind of approach that we use a lot is called validation. As human beings, we want someone to really understand and hear what we're saying. And a lot of times I see in situations where you're dealing with a person with dementia, and you go somewhere, immediately when people realize that that person is not quite comprehending what's going on, they'll start talking to the other person and ignoring that person with dementia. How does that make them feel? It makes them feel like they're not worth paying attention to, or they're not worth listening to. So validation is a very important term that we use to validate feelings, to make sure they feel heard or frustrated or whatever they're feeling. We're saying it's okay to feel that.
Zoom meeting.
Validation can open up a lot of doors when it comes to being able to get them to talk about something. One of the situations that I heard just recently, when a loved one was in a facility and they kept calling their daughter saying, "Why aren't you here? You're here every day. What's going on? Why are you not here?"
Your Catholic
And
charity.
she kept saying, "Well, Mom, there's this epidemic, this pandemic, and I can't come, and there's bugs and there's germs and all this stuff." And it completely went off track. And she kept trying to explain this situation to her mom. It didn't work because her mom didn't remember. That information wasn't going into storage. So 15 minutes later, she had no idea that you had just explained what the COVID pandemic was and why you couldn't come and visit and all of that. So the approach that she finally took was, "Mom, I'm really sorry I can't visit today. You sound upset." And let her mom talk. And she said, "I hear that you're really disappointed. I am too." And all of a sudden her mom was like, "Wow, you heard me. You're upset too? Well, gosh, okay. I understand." And then they approached her with, "Do you think you could help me out during this time? We need to use this thing so I can talk to you easier." Do you think that you can work with the nurses to do that? Well, sure, if it helps you out, yes, I'll do that. So it's validating their feelings. It's scary. I don't know about all of you, but I have felt scared during this pandemic. And I'm sure that folks who have cognitive impairments are going through the same thing. They're dealing with grief and loss of their everyday life. They're not able to go out to restaurants. They're not able to go to memory cafe. They're not able to go shopping. And that's really difficult. So opening that door and allowing them to express their feelings and validating those feelings and saying, you know, I would feel that way too. Positive reassurance, mirroring those feelings. And it also allows them to express feelings in their reality that they are capable of processing. They may not understand why they're really upset, but we can say, we see you're really upset. I feel that way too. And that's a really important thing for folks with dementia. So when we get into the late stages of dementia, most of the time people have progressed to being maybe in a wheelchair or being in a bed. They're not very mobile. They have a difficult time processing things outside of their world. You know, if you're visiting with them and you talk about the cousins they haven't seen, or, you know, the dog they haven't seen, they can't really process that because they're right in the present. Future isn't really important to them, and past isn't so important to them at this point. They're just really quite in this reality at this moment. It may be difficult for them to put into words things, but you can focus on nonverbal communication. If someone's going, you know something is wrong. Their facial expressions are telling you that something is wrong. They're making these noises. They're not saying anything, but they're touching their heads. And so you can say, does your head hurt? You know, is your hair uncomfortable? Is there a pin in there that's not in the right place? You know, a hair clip or something. Is it sore? Is it itchy? Is it, you know, so you can communicate using body language and nonverbal communications. You just have to learn how the other person shows those things. The other thing that you can do is focus on things that are in their environment to visit with them about. Using music, using sense, using touch, sharing your communication with them. All of those things are important ways in the later stages that you can relate to each other. There was a couple that I worked with for many years, and the wife was in a facility in a memory care unit, and she had progressed to the later stages. She was in a wheelchair and really didn't respond verbally to much, but her husband came every day to spend time with her. He was adamant that this is something he needed to do. And they had a routine every day. And the routine was he would come and he would pick her up in her room and take her down to the sunroom. And he had an orange with him. And when they got down to the sunroom, they would sit and look out of the windows. And eventually he would put the orange in her hands and let her feel it. And then he would take the orange back and he would open it and peel the orange and let her smell the peels. And then he would take and open the orange up into sections, and she couldn't eat solid food anymore. But he would take just a little bit of that orange juice and spread it on her lips or on her tongue. And she would lick it and she would smile. And that was just, they hardly ever said a word. Hardly ever said a word, but it was their routine and their interaction. And then he would eat the orange and he would let her taste a little more and he would eat a piece. And they did that every day. And it was a way for them to do something together that didn't require language. So music is a great thing to do together. You can listen to music, or you can enjoy music, or you can watch people doing music. Scents are a wonderful way to incorporate things. Scented hand creams, just giving your loved ones a hand rub and putting on some scented hand cream, or giving them a scented pillow, something that they can hold on to. Touching is a huge thing. Many times they like to hold on to particular things. We even have fidget quilts if someone has a lot of energy and they want to work it out so that they can fidget with things. But you're bringing it not from this big world outside, but you're bringing it down to this little world of where they are at the moment and interacting with them in that world. A lot of people say, well, I shouldn't talk because he can't talk back with me. Well, when you reach this stage, it's okay. You can talk. It may be just a one-sided conversation, but they really do tend to enjoy the socialization and the banter that we have that goes back and forth. So that is something that you can continue to do unless you find that that person is really irritated by it. And if they are, they're going to give you some body language, or they're going to try to move away from you. And at that point, that's a key for you to recognize that this isn't working right now. Maybe I need to just be quiet for now. So one of the things that we do all of the time is we work with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and they are doing enormous amounts of research. And a lot of what we have shown you and learned in this program have come from the research that they've done over the last. We also have a lot of participants in our programs who are interested in finding keys to help with this disease. That is a way that they feel that they're able to help and give back. So many of our folks that we work with participate in research because they say it may not solve this for me, but maybe 20 years from now, something that they learned from me can be applicable for someone else. So that's why we really encourage people to be involved in research and to help you understand that a lot of what we have found or learned over the years has come from the research of the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, as well as the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute. So that is kind of the end of my presentation. And I'm wondering if anybody has any questions that I could share with or answer for you.
I have a question regarding stimulation.
Okay.
I have a brother who I think is early to mid stage, and his wife complains to me that he spends most of his time laying on the bed watching TV, and she has a hard time getting him up and out. And is there a technique that can be used to not irritate him, but to get him up and out?
I think a lot of that's going to have to do with approach. Because if you go in there and just shut his TV off and go, come on, you got to get up and go out, he's not going to be willing to do that.
Right.
So, encouraging him to help her with something. I need your help. Can you come in the kitchen now and help me? Redirecting him. You could bring something in to the bedroom and ask if you could turn off the television because you want to show him something. So, say, hey, I got this great new magazine. It has these beautiful pictures of whatever he likes, birds or flowers or cars or woodworking. And if he's not willing to leave that space, then bringing something else to him other than the TV, you will find that a lot of gentlemen with dementia will use television and watch the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So like they'll watch 20 episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger. And you're like, why? Why do they like that? Well, the reason that they like it is because it doesn't really have a plot. There's a bad guy, there's a good guy, and in the end, the good guy always wins. That's how it goes. So they can follow that. But trying to distract him, either having him come out of that room to help with something, or asking him if he would come and open the door for her. Her hands are full. You know, using something in his world that he would be willing to come out and help her do would be a way to get him out of that room. Many times people with dementia create what they call a nest. It's their safe space. It could be their recliner, or it could be a particular room, or it could be a bed. So trying to get them out of their nest sometimes is difficult, because they've kind of created that they have everything they need right there. So you need to create ways to get him to come out, things that might interest him.
I know she also said that she likes to go for walks, and she could not get him to walk with her, which was kind of sad. But on Mother's Day, they sent a Facebook thing that the daughter came over with their children, and they all went for a walk. So that was, and he seemed to have enjoyed that. So
Perfect.
getting the other person, because I think the wife finally gets to be such old hat.
That's really
You
true.
use one of those expressions you're not supposed to use.
Yes, but it's very true. They get tired of us, and they're like, I can ignore you. But when it's somebody else, then that can be a key. You know what I mean?
But getting back to using expressions, even very early in his dementia, my husband always uses expressions. And my brother had a hard time following his conversation because of that. And
Yes.
it was just a fact. And, you know, it's one of the things that pointed it out. So I'll let someone
Yes.
else ask a question.
Oh, that's all right. No, I'm glad for questions, believe me. Does anyone else have a question? No? Really? I am gonna stop screen sharing so I can see you all a little better. Okay. Well, so one of the things that I'll take just a second and share with you, I always say I think that there are 3 keys to surviving this journey. Because it is a journey. It takes time, and it progresses, and it changes. So the first key we kind of talked about in communication. It's realizing that their world is different than your world. And the realities aren't the same. Like right now, all of us are together at the same moment. And even though our background experiences are completely different, we're all kind of in the same spot together. And what's going to happen is we're all going to take some information and learn it, store it, process it, respond to it, and we move a little bit. And we continually do that. That's how we learn. We input information, we process, and we move forward. And we move forward, and we move forward. And we keep doing that. That's the whole experience. The toughest part, though, is when that person with dementia isn't able to learn anymore. And their world stops. So you're with them at that moment, but then all of a sudden you continue to grow and change and move and progress, and they're stuck. And they aren't able to come out of that reality because their brain isn't functioning quite right. So we have to go into their reality and come back out. And in the beginning, the realities are pretty close, so it's not very hard. But the farther apart those realities get, the harder it is to go back into that person's world. So just realizing that their world and your world are different, and they're influenced differently, and that you, because we are, as the caregiver, able to adapt, you have to go into their world. So that's the first key. The second key is never argue with a person with dementia. You're not going to win. And it's just not worth it. That creates more problems than you can possibly admit. And many times it is our natural instinct that when someone does something incorrectly or says something incorrectly, we correct them. It's what we do because we expect them to be able to learn from that and then move forward with new information so that they don't continue to make that same mistake. That doesn't work with people with dementia. It just doesn't work. So it's not worth your frustration and their frustration and you're feeling bad and they're feeling bad to do that. The third thing that you have to remember is as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself through this journey because if you don't take care of yourself, there's not going to be anyone there to care for your loved one. We don't want to lose you and have you become I'm not using my words correctly. Sorry. We don't want to lose you while you're caring for someone else. I have been in this job 6 years. And in that time, I have buried 4 caregivers before the person that they were caring for because they ran themselves into the ground. And it's not safe to do that. So it's really important that the caregivers have to stop and take care of themselves. And that is a critical part of this journey. So does anyone else have questions? Judith or Lisa or Jennifer, Pamela, Joanna, Melissa?
I guess not. My only regret is that I'm so far away because my brother and his wife live in Kansas City, and she has resisted going for things like this to help her understand. And she had been cared for all her life by her husband, and so she's having a very difficult time with the caregiver role. So I encourage her to go to the senior center that has programs. I don't know if she's done it yet. She just doesn't like to go out beyond her own little world. Yes.
Yeah.
So
well, and sometimes caregivers are so overwhelmed that just one more thing is not something they can do. You know what I mean?
And that's, I
one
think,
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, something that might be helpful is there is probably a coalition on aging or an aging department within the county that she lives at that might also be helpful for resources. And there are programs. There is a program called the National Family Care Support Program that is out there that is designed to help families keep their loved ones at home for a longer period of time. And there's funds set aside. Every county handles it a little bit differently, but that's a national program. So she could find out through her county who organizes or uses that funding. She may be able to use it for respite or for equipment or for transportation. Things might make her life a little easier with her loved one. So
I've talked to her daughters about it, and they say she just isn't one to reach out. And so that's always the way she's been. And so until they can get her, one of her daughters, she trusts implicitly. And that daughter is overworked with her own life. So it's very frustrating to watch. And I do what I can. And sometimes I've ruffled some feathers and then I backed off. And so what do you do?
That's the best that you can do. Some people are really determined that they don't want help and want to reach out for help. The hardest part is, I always tell people, it's like trying to balance a stool on one leg. You can't. It won't balance because there's only one thing to hold it up, and that's you as the caregiver. So you need to put other legs underneath that stool to make it better, to make it more stable, to make it stronger, and to kind of get ready for the future. A lot of people wait until a big crisis before they reach out for help.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to encourage people not to wait until that, happens. But, even if she would like to dial into one of these presentations, she is more than welcome to do that. We're happy to help, or if she has questions and just wants to talk. I know she isn't one to reach out, but just like we say, using folks with dementia, ask them to do it with you. Maybe she would be willing to join one of these with you, while you were here. So just a thought, but.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I didn't realize comments didn't show up like right up, but I've got a whole bunch of comments here. It's someone said, could you share helpful links that will talk about this sort of stuff and all the different kinds of dementia and ways to best help them? Yes, I have lots. We have hundreds and hundreds of handouts. We have booklets. We have the ability to Zoom or meet with you to help you through this. I can do it by phone. I can do it by Zoom if you don't want to meet in person. It is very difficult sometimes to know how to approach people when you're dealing with all sorts of different topics. Communication is only one. And we have 3 more presentations scheduled. The next one is next week on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. And my partner, the Dane County Outreach Specialist in Madison, Wisconsin, is going to be doing that one. And it's going to be a discussion on how do you engage people with dementia in activities, because like you said, sometimes they get stuck in their nest, in their bed, and they just watch TV and they don't want to do anything. So how do you encourage them to do things? How do you encourage them to get up and do a walk? Or how do you get them out of the bed just to experience a different room? And then the one after that is called, Is It Time for Facility Care? And basically that just talks, it doesn't mean that you're ready to have to place your loved one, but what it does is it gets you thinking about what might be beneficial to know before that crisis hits. What kinds of things do you need to have in place? What kinds of things do you need to have ready? What kinds of facilities are in your area? What questions do you even ask? What does it look like to even look at a facility? So that's another good presentation that has a lot of information. That's 2 weeks from today at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then 3 weeks from today, we're going to be doing another virtual presentation about understanding difficult behaviors, because that nesting instinct or hoarding or caregiver super glue, or Velcro as we call it, pocketing things, rummaging, shadowing. There's a whole bunch of things that people with dementia start to do at different times that you may not understand what it is or why they're doing it, and how to handle those behaviors. How do you brainstorm a way to take action and try to make that situation better? And so we're going to talk about all of those things, and behaviors as what they call an unmet need, rather than labeling them as behaviors. So
What time of day is that one going to be on, June 4th?
that one is also at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So we'd love to have you all come back. If any of you want me to send out the virtual links to you for those presentations, I can do that too. We have them in an email form. So
Can I jump in just a second? That
You
was
sure
a
can.
special ed teacher, right? I'm the husband of Judy. My
Hi.
name is Bill.
Hi, Bill.
My question is pertinent to type of characters that you're dealing with in terms of their personality nature. The one that Judy was referring to, the male of that person in Kansas, he was very on top of his world with regard to his military experience,
Ah.
and his wife was essentially separate from that and
Mm-hmm.
had very little to do with it. And he was essentially the male contributor to this family from a distance, from his experience in the military. And they espouse that with a great deal of pride. And he does
Mm-hmm.
too. The predicament I witness is that they don't have any commonality there with that. They know nothing of what he did, and they see heroic actions like he was fished out of Tonkin Bay during the Vietnam thing,
Mm-hmm.
and their coherent connection there is very minimal.
Yeah.
So I'm suggesting with all of this, you have to know the other person intimately and get into their world. And what you were saying previously was that often isn't done in whatever the connections are. You know,
Right.
how much can you identify with your husband who is a woodworker and you happen to be a seamstress? You know, what can you put together there? It seems to me that if you did do that, you'd have some successes far beyond what is common. But
Exactly.
the predicament then is you have no basis to get into that world. You don't want to know how to do chainsaw carving, for example, and that is what I do.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think what he's bringing out is that the caregiver has to learn how to ask questions, and that's all.
And
Isn't that
live
right?
that
Exactly.
world.
And
Yep.
ask the questions, because many times I think a dementia person would love to talk about that, and I have done that with my brother. Asked
Yes.
about his experiences and things.
Yes.
And even if you do it every week and get the same answers, that's okay, right?
Right. Because talking about it is something that they enjoy. It's a positive experience for them and they share it. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if they're sharing the same thing over and over again. They're getting the positive feedback from doing that, and it's good for them and it's good for you. And, you know, one of the other things I would just add on to what you said is asking those questions and getting involved, um, is even using in-home care to do that too. Like, one of the things that we talk about is, you know, how do you handle home care? How do you get someone to come in if that person doesn't want to accept having another person in the house? And you said about finding that person's intimate knowledge. Um, you know, we had a gentleman who was completely, like, his parents were from Norway. He was Norwegian, but had been born in the United States, was all into trolls and all into everything Norway. And so when his wife decided that she needed some help and just needed to take a break and have someone else interact with him, we had that person come in and say, you know, I'd really like to learn about Norwegian trolls. Could you teach me? And all of a sudden he was all over that and wanted to show them and teach them and talk about it. And that led to a lot of other things. And then, you know, the person would be like, oh, well, do you mind if I come back and we could talk more about this? And by the time she would come back, he would have forgotten and would tell her the same stories over and over again. But it didn't matter because he felt wonderful teaching her or telling her or sharing with her. And she felt wonderful. And his wife felt wonderful because she got to take a break. You know what I mean? So that's really important, that validation piece, and really being willing to listen to that person and open the door can make a big difference.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Oh my goodness. So someone, Lisa just posted, I went with my dad to Washington, D.C. on the honor flight. There you go. That's
Yeah,
those intimate experiences that you can share and share over and over again with him. That's fantastic.
but it goes the other way too, you know. The question remains, how do you get that person to enter the real world that the problems you are dealing with? And in the case of Judy and her brother, uh, they're they're sharing things out of their childhood, but they didn't have a childhood together. He went off to the service and was off to
Seminary.
other activities, and he's often uh, in the dark regarding what happened in his hometown with his contemporaries. And
Right.
she enlightens him to some of that, but they'll never be the same. You know,
Right.
he'll never come up to date because those are years that were gone from him now.
Right.
And the good part of that, though, is there are still human experiences that are common that probably ought to be dealt with, and it might relate to church activities or social interaction that he has to get developed into because he was part
Definitely.
of a different society, and the military life is very unknown to many civilians. I experienced a little of that myself because I
Yep.
was activated in my senior year of college, and that whole form of thinking is not common to civilian life.
Yes. Yes.
Decisions made about what clothes you wear day to day, now
Yeah.
they have to be made, you know.
Right. And
And what is,
even asking those questions, getting his wife to say, so where'd you put your stuff when you were in the army? Did you have a locker? Did you have a bag? Did you and just opening that door to asking those questions is important because that is something he's going to be able to remember. It's going to be very ingrained in him. And it gets them talking. And that,
and furthermore, the interaction about social topics, like what was it like with Black people in your units?
yeah,
And and did they have a part to play in your advancement of civic affairs later on? And during the Vietnam thing, were you opposed or were you not familiar with what was happening in our cities and
yeah,
our youth? Our young people have different attitudes. We're experiencing our neighborhood right now with this COVID thing that kids are playing together, and we're excited about it because our kids played together, and
exactly.
and we didn't have orchestrated communal events like soccer teams and basketball teams that not everybody could belong to. These things are social uh, divergencies, and they're troublesome. You know, the fact that a person can be a basketball player and not be on the team is not particularly good of general population. And yet
It
we
is
pay little or no attention to that because we're looking for the win.
right. It'll be interesting to see how things after this. You know what I mean? Because I think the pandemic is definitely going to change a lot of things. So some for the good, some maybe for the not good, but we'll see. I do think there's going to be some positive changes coming forward. So
I do too.
yeah. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you dialing in, and hopefully I will see you again in 2 weeks if you're able to join us. And I will send out the invite, and if there's anyone else that you want to share to come and join us, you're more than welcome to.
You mean I could come back?
Yes, by all means, Belle.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. You all too. Take care.
Let's go for a walk.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. Elizabeth Smith.